Marvin, he should have been in the hall a long time ago. He changed the game of baseball, at least for the players.
The players today that wouldn't have a thing if it hadn't been for Marvin's leadership and foresight and vision. I hope this will be a resurgence of the history of Marvin Miller and what he meant to baseball.
To see the impact he has made on the game, after all, it is a Hall of Fame. And when you mention Marvin Miller in baseball circles, he's very famous. So I think this is such a long time coming for a number of reasons. Marvin, I can't thank you enough for the life that I've had in baseball because of what you did. The word came out that he was going to be hired in 67, starting in 68. I think I first met him at this giant pep rally we had. I believe it was at the Biltmore Hotel. I don't think I met him as an alternate player rep before that. And that's when Mays, a lot of the superstars got up and said, yes, we're not going to sign contracts. And this is what we are shooting for, the rights to the pension. And kind of a cute side note is that when Marvin first met Calvin Griffith down in Florida, the Twins owner, he was having lunch with him, and Calvin was all at Twitter because he said, are you going to negotiate every player's contract? Nobody really had a clue as to exactly what Marvin was going to do. But yeah, I'd say my first meetings with him, there was some apprehension on all of our parts because this was whole new ground for players to think about unionizing. And of course, as I got to know him over the years, we realized what a valuable asset he was to our organization.
I was a young player then, had been in the major leagues maybe a little over a year, and I get a phone call from Carl Yastrzemski. I don't know Carl Yastrzemski other than playing against him. So he was calling on behalf of the Red Sox about us not going out on strike, trying to get us to fall in line. And I thanked him. I said, but I was going to follow the players and what Marvin said.
When I'm the second generation, these guys were on the front line. And when I came in, I wanted to join the union and be a real part of it because I was in the minor league system with the Oakland A's. And of course, Sal Bando was third baseman. And that I could see right then I wasn't going to go anywhere in the big leagues for a while. So I wanted to get involved and figure out a way to solve that problem. I thought players originally, what I really thought was the minor league players ought to have the movement. The big league players didn't have anything. That's how selfish I was. And so when you get involved with the Players Association, Marvin was really good about every year giving a history of the organization, of the Players Association, so that you had a sense of where we had been, where the movement had brought us, and where we really wanted to go.
Yeah, I think what ownership tried to do, Yawkey with the Red Sox, Wrigley with the Cubs, because they really took good care of their players. I remember, fast forward, Mike Shannon sliding into Glenn Beckert at second base, taking him into left field and say, that's for not voting with us, because Wrigley took such good care of him. And I sensed some opposition because Harmon, Calvin really took care of Harmon Killebrew. He was our face of our franchise, and he knew if he made Harmon happy, make us all happy. So I had quite a battle, as did Bob Allison, because Bob was pretty tied into, loyal to the ownership. And if you remember in the early days, guys that were player reps soon got traded, because they had to take the complaints to the front office, and the front office got tired of hearing them. So said, I'm surprised I didn't get traded. But yes, there was some opposition because of some of, it wasn't all the owners that said, hey, you guys have no right to do this, because there were the Yawkeys and the Wrigleys. But for the most part, eventually they all came around. I think Marvin, with his very soft way of not getting acrimonious with the conversation, would very gently convince every one of us that this was going to be a good thing. Leadership style, what I what I gleaned right from the first, Bob Allison was our rep. I was the alternate. So I did go to a lot of meetings, and we were all ears because we didn't know what was going to happen. But Marvin had this way, very soft-spoken, of pointing out what the risks were and what the rewards could be. And he was always committed to, you guys have to be in this 100% together, because I think at the time there were 20 or 24. No, I think there were 20, maybe coming up on 24 owners. And he said, they can't trust each other. And I'll give you a story from Steve Rinko. You may know about Steve. I think at one time thought maybe we were pushing the envelope a little too hard. And he questioned Marvin about it. And Marvin, in his soft-spoken way, said, Steve, how many attorneys do you think there are in one square block of New York City? And Steve didn't know. And Marvin said, well, there are thousands. And he says, there's only 600 of you guys, and I'm going to teach you what you're worth. And so, Marvin, that's the way he, with the pension we wanted and not signing contracts, he never demanded. He always said, you guys have to stick together. And that's why I think by sticking together, we've been one of the most successful collective bargaining organizations in the history of sports.
I experienced the same thing with Marvin. Never heard him raise his voice. He had a way of turning, the tables on you. He said, well, why don't we do this? He'd explain something and you'd get done and say, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't do that. So he was brilliant. He really was. And it was a pleasure to serve under him. Without them, we wouldn't have be where we are today. But I have to tell you one interesting story. When I was with Oakland and Charlie Finley made a trade that the commission wouldn't allow. And so Finley was going to sue baseball and sue the commissioner, and he wouldn't let Joe Rudy, Vita Blue, and Raleigh Fingers play. And we're in a pennant race. So I had to call Marvin, and I said, Marvin, these guys, owner won't let us play our guys. We're going out on strike. And he said, I don't want you to do that. I said, I'll have another meeting with the guys and I'll tell them what you said. But I'm telling you, Marvin, they want to go out on strike if we don't get those guys back in the game. And sure enough, we called Finley's bluff. He let those guys back in the game, and Marvin was very appreciative ever since.
I think it was Dick Young that wrote in New York after one of our major strikes that Marvin Miller issued edicts to the players and told them what they were going to do, and that thereby he was the most powerful guy, the union guy in the country. And that is not at all the way Marvin was. Never told us we were going to do anything at all. It was always, he always in these meetings would put forth the information that he had, and he was very good about putting forth information. And he would say, these are what the potential consequences are. This is what's going to happen if you don't do this, and this is what's going to possibly happen if you do this. And Jim was right. He always wanted everybody to be on board with that. He said, look, we need to be a strong force here. If we're a strong force, we can get things accomplished. I thought his leadership style was fabulous. And I'm in 100% agreement with Sal. I'm sure Jim would say the same thing, that players today that wouldn't have a thing if it hadn't been for Marvin's leadership and foresight and vision in all of this.
We had everybody's phone number, and you called guys, and it was more difficult communicating then. And you did have on our team, no question, Harmon, and that's what the owners tried to do. They tried to get the stars to come down on the other players and say, hey, this isn't right. And what Marvin asked us to do in a gentle way is I had to point out to Harmon, and to the other players did too, that we needed to band together for the benefit of all the players.
They should remember who Marvin was. They should remember the first players on the line here, because it made it easier for everybody else when they came along, when the players came along. I think at one point some people said that he was the most powerful man in America, and he might very well have been, because we were willing to listen to him, and the ability that he had to pull the players together controlled what was the most popular game in the country at the time during those times. So I think he was very powerful. He was very instrumental in getting freedom to the players. Players in the NFL pension was woefully inadequate. It was actually not very good at all. And when he heard what our pensions were, I think it spurred the NFL on players. The movement started there too, to do better in their pension and to have a better pension than they had. So Marvin's influence not only captivated the baseball world, I think it influenced the NFL and probably the NBA too.
Well, I think obviously giving us the opportunity to become free agents had increased our bargaining power 100%. And it was no more you take it or leave it. And ownership had to be aware of what was down the road. So I think free agency and our way to free agency was the big attribute. I was able to become a free agent. I went for it, and it changed the game. And very thankful to Marvin and what he did and putting his reputation on the line. And it was some interesting meetings with the players. Bob Boone represented the National League. I represent the American League, and it got a little testy here and there, but we ended up getting it done.
One of his brilliant moves with free agency, because I remember Calvin Griffith said, well, is every player going to be a free agent every year? And Marvin, kind of chuckling quietly in the room, said, no, we don't want everybody to be a free agent every year. We want to just kind of a few players in every year. So they eventually agreed where every team could have control for 6 years. And then, of course, arbitration came in, which was an added bonus, maybe even as valuable as free agency. But that's why Marvin very astutely said, no, we don't want to be every player a free agent every year. As Phil mentioned, I think that's what created the supply and demand and the amount of money to go up.
The ability to move was important. Now, let me go back to what I remember. And this is clearly what I remember, that nobody knew what free agency was going to behold in terms of dollars. Let's say that Sal goes to become a free agent and there's 4 third basemen out there and you have one owner that wants a third baseman, the price could go down. So players didn't know at the time that there was a pot of gold perhaps at the end of your free agent year. So it was a big risk on everybody's part. The only thing, players wanted to have the ability at some point in their career to move, to go to some city that they want to go to city. So it wasn't, don't trust anybody in my mind today that says, yeah, the players were greedy and they thought they were going to make a lot of money, because I don't remember that they really thought we were going to make a lot of money. And at one time, our owner, when we were arguing this, I was playing with the Houston Astros at this time after getting traded from Oakland, and we were getting ready to go on strike about they wanted to take free agency away. And our owner, John McMullen, a good New York guy, called me a goddamn communist and said, you're a goddamn communist, you guys. That's all you want to do. You're just communists. And so I said, no, John, we just like to have the ability to keep moving and don't restrict the free agency. So I think the big legacy was the ability to be a free agent. Now, Marvin might have known what was going to happen after that, but a lot of players didn't. I'll make one other comment about that. I think it might have been, I don't remember who signed the first Oakland A contract as a free agent, but I remember Gene Tennis walking around singing, "If I Were a Rich Man," the old song. And we were talking about $100,000 a year in those days, being a rich man.
Says Charlie owes me $50,000 by October 10 or something, a bonus. And his agent was a good country gentleman from down there in Carolina. He said, we haven't got the check yet. And Catfish says, what would you do? Now, Marvin didn't have this right in his book, because he said, I told Catfish, it's never going to happen. I said, no, Catfish, don't do a thing until you call Marvin Miller. So Catfish, before Messersmith and McNally, was actually the first free agent to sign a contract, because Charlie never paid him his bonus and he was free and went to the Yankees. And, in those days to get $500,000 was like over the moon.
The other thing is, I think they need to understand the mechanism. A lot of these players have come through a system that was designed for them to have some mobility. They have the ability to at 2 years to go to arbitration. And by the way, a lot of the young players never understood how arbitration got in there, but arbitration got thrown in there to satisfy Mike Marshall, the pitcher for the Dodgers. And I'm in the meeting with Marvin and Steve Rogers and Steve Renko, Doug DeCinces, and Mike Marshall's going to sue us all if we give away 1-and-1 free agency. And to Jim's question, Marvin said, maybe it's not such a good idea for 1-and-1 free agency. And Bob Boone said, I think players would rather have the ability to make the most money they could with limited movement rather than having unlimited movement and perhaps not making as much money. And so Marshall's going around, I'll sue every one of you. I'll sue you individually if you give up the 1-and-1. And finally, Marvin says, how about we have an arbitration set for that second year player? And so the year that's finished his second year. So 1 year of signing a contract, 1 year option. And then that third year is whenever you would be able to get your arbitration. And that solved Mike Marshall's dilemma. And so if an owner ever says now that arbitration was never supposed to be, that's not accurate. The arbitration was definitely designed to take care of the ball players that were giving up their ability to become free agents prior to 6 years.
We were in Houston playing an exhibition game, and the word came down, players are going on strike. Calvin Griffith was there. And he said, I got 19 members of my family on the payroll. I can exist for a long time. You guys won't make the next paycheck. Of course, I looked over at Harmon and I said, I told you so, And so he said, hang in there, for 9 days was a lot for some of us. Just to give you a little side story, as Pete Rose later said, that cost me $6,000. Well, we're sitting in the outfield grass at Clearwater, Florida, when Pete signed his contract 4 years for 3.2. Marvin didn't want to embarrass him, but he said, Pete, I hope you feel like that losing that 6,072 was worth it to you now in 1980. But Marvin pointed out what we were going to go through, and I think he was very confident that the owners were going to crack before we did, and they always did.
Well, I think players had the advantage because for most of us, it was nothing to lose. We were getting screwed. They were holding back money that we should have been paid. And it was easy to take a stand. For those that had good relationships and played for the Red Sox and they probably got what they wanted, they had difficulty going out on strike. But for most of us, it was a welcome challenge.
And as Sal said, we didn't have anything to lose. I mean, I was having decent years and taking a cut in salary. I remember Jim Bunning had encouraged me before CURT flood. And I want to just say a word right now that I'm so disappointed that most of us, and particularly a lot of his teammates, that we were not more supportive of CURT Flood for what he did for us and eventually paid off in 76. But boy, what he did to step out, I wish I would have had the nerve to do that a couple of years earlier. But what baseball did a good job of is they encouraged you to get married and have a couple kids, so they knew you had a family to support and you weren't going to be able to walk away from the game too easy. And that's what they held over us. It's the current player's job. And I know I've been in some meetings when Michael Weiner was there, Craig Breslow, and some of the guys really did a good job in educating everybody as to what the early days in the Players Association meant. So I think that's what I would stress to, because they're going to have to stick together. The example in 1981, I was 42 years old, and that strike hit. And I had become close to Bowie Kuhn. And I said, Bowie, always use the best interest of baseball clause to get things settled. I said, if anybody were had a reason to vote against the players. I said, I'm 42 years old. I'm making $150,000. It ended up costing me a third of my salary. I said, I'm never going to get that back, but I am not going to give in, and neither are any of the players. And this thing is going on until the owners run out of strike insurance. So why don't you step in and settle? Of course, he never did, but I think that gave me a true indication of how strong our association was. And I would hope that the current players continue that strength.
Message would be, look at your history and understand it and appreciate it. I myself too also took a hit in 1981. I was retiring after the season. So whatever I lost during negotiations, I wasn't going to get back, which was fine because we were standing strong as a team. And I just think today the guys should have more appreciation for the price that a lot of guys paid for them.
The history is so important. Some of the younger players that I've listened to today do not understand the sacrifices made to get them where they are. And they were sacrifices. When this all started, it was earlier in my career. Jim had alluded to earlier that I was a player rep for the Pittsburgh Pirates when our big strike came down, and the years all run together on me. So, but after the strike, I was traded along with, I think Steve Rogers was traded. I was assistant player rep for the National League. All of us were traded in those deals. Now, that's not necessarily such a bad thing, but it was the connotation that if you're going to be involved with the union, you're going to take a hit. Well, took a little bit of a monetary hit, but not like the older guys that stood up and they were in the back years of their contracts. It would have been easier for them to say, no, I'm not going to do this because I want to make this kind of money. But they made the sacrifices, and the younger players need to know that. They need to know that history.
And there's only one player. Now, this is my 63rd season being involved in Major League Baseball as a player, coach, or announcer. I've had one player back in the 90s. I was doing a TV game in St. Louis, and Rex the Wonder Dog Hudler comes running over to me, jumps up and down, and he said, I got to thank you guys. I'm making more money than I ever dreamed I would, and it's all because of what you guys did. That's the only player that's ever done that.
History is a good indicator of what you can expect. And I think we turned the corner, the players, that is, when we stood our ground and we didn't budge, and ownership eventually gave in and changed the compensation. And I think today's players need to take a stand and talk about what's right and fair and equitable for the players now and players in the past.
My personal deal is to think we have, I live a nice lifestyle right now. It's due to Marvin's vision, his leadership. It's due to the players that were on the front line when all this started. And by the way, the pension fund is solid, and it wouldn't have been had it not been for the Bandos and the Kaats and the others, and Marvin, who that was how he got his first big move in the Players Association, is making sure the pension fund was covered. So these players today, they don't tend to think about the pension fund until it's over, until their careers are over. And then they start thinking, well, I didn't save enough money. I got a pretty good lifestyle. So all those things are extremely important, and it's going to be important for the modern day player. He just needs to be told and understand that, down the road, you take care of these things today. It's your legacy in baseball that the older players were very smart. They were very very diligent in the way they handled the business of baseball and the union. And it falls on the younger players to do the same thing for the next class coming after them. And that's all Marvin's legacy.